Hey everybody, Scoutcrafter here again. It's Mish Mosh Monday. Hope you had a good weekend. We got a few things different today planned, some unusual projects, but first off, let me start by showing you my hydrangea. Now, if you're not familiar with the hydrangea bush, there's about 75 different species. They come in many different colors and sizes, and they can grow quite big, and they're just a beautiful plant. They're native to the US and lots of parts of Asia. But I'd be interested to know if you have any of these in your neighborhood and if you ever like looking at them like I do. Here's a hydrangea, and you can see it's just starting to mature, and it gets these beautiful flowers on there. And I've always loved this, but it needs a lot of water. I guess that's why they call it a hydrangea. Okay, next up on the Mosh, a couple people, good friend of the show, Anthony Perillo, and some other people were asking about highlighting, about painting and things like that, getting the letters. And I'm going to go through that little by little, but I want to show you with this type first, okay? Here we have some raised lettering with a recess. This is perfect for some color. And this is that little tap wrench that everybody liked. And it's about just under 4 inches long. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take some alcohol and an old toothbrush, and we're going to make sure and scrub this really clean and get that sparkly clean before we start. Okay, now that it's nice and clean, the technique for this is basically we're going to flood this whole area with paint, okay? And I have some just regular paint. This is it's a Krylon liquid, but any kind of paint that you have, enamel, anything like that. Flood the whole area with paint, and then, now if it's acrylic enamel, something that's water-based, I like to take my finger and just wipe it off like that, and that'll show the lettering underneath. But with oil-based, you don't really want to put that on your finger, so you could just take a piece of this kind of paper towel almost, but not the one with the bumps in it, you know, something flat, and dip it in some thinner, and then take it like this, and then wipe the tip like that, and it will come off. Now, if it takes it off, and it takes a little too much off, you could always fill it in with a little extra paint, but that's the key. So let's do that. We're going to try this this paint here. What happened to the black? I thought he was doing it in black. That's not black. That's red. Okay, we're calling this done. Now you can see here, looks nice, right? Now you see how that's looks kind of thick in here. Let me show you a good tip if you can do this. Okay, here I am over at my 1940s American Standard furnace, which runs, I even use this to heat my hot water. So there's always warm air coming through there, okay? It's an old oil burner. Now what I do is, while this paint is setting up, I'll put this over the vent here, and then I'll cover it. If it's big enough, I usually use a can, but this can's not big enough. But I'll cover it with something, even a piece of foil, and then that temperature will really let that set in there, and I'll leave that there for a day or two, and that'll be set in, almost like baked on. And it'll come out perfect like that. Now here I bent the can a little bit, place it right over the vent like this. And I'll just leave that sit there. Now that'll build up about, you know, 100 degrees, 115 degrees in there, constant, and that'll really set the paint. Okay, here we are the next day, and you could see how nice that filled in there. It looks almost like a enameled, and which it is, enamel paint, but it looks, with the oven baking, it really lets it set in, and the letters pop out, so I always find a nice way to do it. This is a very easy one to do lettering. We'll discuss other types of lettering in the upcoming episodes, but that's just to let you know how to do lettering like this. Okay, next up we got something a little bit different. I got a good friend of mine that retired a few years before I did, and actually I haven't seen him since, but we converse all the time on email. He's not a YouTuber, but this friend of mine and I, we used to watch this show called The Walking Dead. It was a zombie show on television. We used to laugh about it and joke about it. So he always liked this one guy, Negan, was this character, and he had this crazy bat that was wrapped with barbed wire. And I don't know, it's kind of like a weapon. I don't know what it is. It's kind of maybe a guy thing. Let me show you something years ago in one corner of my basement, you'll see I got some old free flight airplanes, but I also have this thing hanging here, and it's been hanging here for years. Let me show you what it is. Now, years ago, a friend of mine by the name of Eddie Daly was cleaning out his car, and he had this little baseball bat. And he was throwing it out, and I said, what are you going to do with that? He says, you want it? It's gone. I said, yeah. So I took it. I came home. I stained it. I put these nails in it and made it into kind of like, I don't know what it is, but there was just something cool about it, you know. And this is a great grip, you know. This is that tennis handle grip. It'd be great for hammers or something. It really is nice. And it's got a little lanyard that you could wrap around your wrist and put on here. But you know something? It became very intimidating. Whenever I would show somebody, they'd say, geez, that thing looks dangerous. Although it's really not a great weapon, because if you ever hit somebody with this, it would kind of get stuck in them more or less. But it is interesting, isn't it? So on these same lines, I decided to make a Negan Bat. Now, I have two old bats. This one here is an old Adirondack. Yeah, Adirondack, which I don't even remember that name, but this is an old baseball bat. This is vintage. And this one here, I just got at the flea market for $5. This is a George Brent. It's probably worth something, but it's going to be a Negan. I'm going to make one for Bobby and one for me. And I'm just going to show you how I do it. So it's just something fun. Step one is we got to remove the paint from here, because Negan's bat was kind of like a dark color. So we got to take off the paint and any, this always had like kind of a shellackish or something on here. We're going to scrape that off. And what we're going to do is, to do it, we're going to use my favorite tool, a straight edge razor blade. And we're going to go with the grain. Now you see here, the grain ends here, so that means you got to scrape up this way. But look how easy that comes off, right? So that's going to be a while. Okay, that was pretty satisfying, right? Now, next up, we're going to take some sandpaper and just go over it lightly and take off any high spots or anything. Now, you know, the bat's supposed to look kind of beat up a little bit, but we're just doing this to make it smooth and also so the stain will absorb into the wood. Now, as you know, I use these old bird seed bags as kind of drop cloths and things like that, but one thing I always loved is the graphics on these bird seed bags. Some of them are just so beautiful. Here we have a few beautiful birds at a sunset setting, and I always thought if you can make this into a light box or something, or illuminate it from behind, it would look really nice. Now, one thing I always like to do is to wipe down everything with some mineral spirits, odorless mineral spirits on a paper towel, and just wipe it down. And this way it gets rid of not only any dirt or residue, but it also conditions the wood, and it makes it less blotchy when you're putting stain on. Then, of course, I put the stain on. Notice I'm doing this all with a small piece of rag. I'm not using any brushes or any foam brush, or just a small swatch of rag. You know, that's all you need to do a really good job. And just wipe it on, and then just set it aside and let it dry. After that, I put on one coat of amber shellac just to seal everything. Okay, now we have our barbed wire. This is a 15 gauge. It's a thinner barbed wire. It's called gaucho. It's very, very sharp. And what's good about this, it's pliable to bend around the bat, and but it's extremely sharp. And now we're going to need a couple fencing staples, they call them, but I don't have any. So I take a regular 6D galvanized nails and turn them, bend them, cut them, bend them in the vise, and make your own little fence staples. They're going to need about 6 or 8 of those, and then we're going to wrap it around the bat. So we're going to need a vise, and we have this vise. This is an old friend of mine passed away years ago and left me his vise. I'm going to take this, and we're going to string 20 feet of this barbed wire. Okay, here we have the other half in the vise, the other end. And here we have a little over 20 feet of barbed wire, and we're going to stretch it out. Now, it has a tendency to want to coil up because it's been around a coil. So you have to stretch it up and put one end, using a fence staple, into the bat. Okay, now we're going to take a barbed wire here and we're going to lay it against the bat. We're going to drill 2 small holes, just slightly less in diameter than the fencing staple that we made. And then we're going to place this here and we're going to nail these in using a hammer, and we're going to do that now. Now this staple is the most important one, the first one you're going to put in, because now you're going to wind it up. You are going to walk your way towards the vise, turning the bat and winding it up around the bat. Now once you bring the wire and stretch it very tightly, put 2 more staples in. I put one over here towards the end. I coupled it up and covered another piece. And then I put one here. So there's a total of 3 staples holding this wire on. It's not going anywhere because it's holding onto the wood and it's very tight around here. So don't overdo it with the staples. Now you're going to be left with a little, just bend it up here so it can't pull out of there. And so it can't slide down that staple. And then you just put a couple angle cuts there with a pair of diagonals. One here. One here. And again, those will be sharp and those will look almost like the barbed wire. And that's it. We're done. And here we have it. 2 Negan bats. And let me tell you, these are very formidable and sharp. This stuff is sharp. I have 4 little puncture wounds to prove how sharp it is. There was that little oval that they had on the one from the movie. That's why that oval's there. But anyway, that's it. And I'm going to ship that one out to Bobby. He'll be surprised when he gets that in the mail. I hope his wife don't open it. Okay, let's see what else we got. Next up on the Mosh, we have a little bit of a fabrication. This is for a friend of mine, Dan, you know, my mentor. And Dan is, he collects those little miniature lathes. You've seen them before. And he always, because he's a perfectionist, he likes to have a box for every lathe that he has. And it really looks nice, and it keeps them from getting broken because they can be kind of fragile. So he looks around anytime he can. He comes across these boxes. He picks them up and repurposes them. This one here he picked up. This must be a military box because of the thickness, the gauge of the metal. But you could see here, it's got a couple of pieces that were added on. And look, it's got rubber grommets and stuff. And it's heavy duty. But he wants this removed, that piece there, and this whole section down here. You could see he wants that removed too, because this way the lathe will fit in there nicely. The problem is that years ago when they made these boxes, especially for the military or something, they would put what's called a spot rivet. I'm sorry, a spot weld. And what a spot weld is basically there's a hole in this piece of metal, and they would come here with an electric spot welder and would weld these 4 areas, and he circled them where the spot welds are. And we're going to use this little tool here that he supplied, and it's a spot weld cutter to try and cut around spot welds. I have no idea, never used this before, never tried anything like this, but we're going to learn together. Maybe we can figure out how it's done. Never be afraid to use some extra magnification here. You could see that that red dot is exactly in the center using magnification and some highlighting. We got directly in the center there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to center punch and then use a spot drill. Okay, this is the little spot weld remover, and you can see what it is. It's a little carbide hole drill, more or less, and this is spring loaded, that little center punch. And the idea of putting that little center drill, just a little dimple in there, is that so that this won't wander, because they heard they have a tendency to wander once they start cutting. And it's a pretty strong spring, so once we're going to go in there, we're going to add a little cutting fluid and try and cut just a circle of that to only go through the top layer, not the bottom. Okay, here's where we're at. Do you see that? You see the cut around there? So now I don't want to keep going until something pops or whatever, because I definitely don't want to go through this surface. I just want to go through that. So that looks pretty deep to me, so I'm going to leave that like that. Okay, and do the other one. Success. You can see how this panel's lifting off here now. So it does work, and now we got to do about 12 more of these, and hopefully these will pop off. So let's get to that. Okay, we're calling this project done. Everything worked out nice. Took the bottom plate, the top plate off. The only plate I couldn't get off Well, the only part was back here. There's a small little outset here with grommets, and I would need a right angle drill because there's nothing that I have that can go in there. And also this is very thin. I don't want to go through that. Ground these down. All of these are ground down, and then I shellac them so that they won't rust until Dan. Now what Dan does is he takes this whole box, sands it down, and then he does it in hammerite. Nice hammerite green, and he'll do it up real nice. But I cut a piece of wood for the bottom here, so that's all ready to go. And a couple things about this bit that I wanted to talk about. These things are great. Again, it's got this little protective tip over here that's spring-loaded. One thing to remember, though, it does want to fly out of that little... You can't do this with just a center punch. The best thing to do is to drill a small hole in the center, maybe a 1/16 of an inch deep, so that this is really captive. Otherwise, if this spins out, it wants to walk when the teeth start to grip. But you can see here the teeth are all in good shape. We didn't break any. And just go slow and use cutting fluid. Okay, that was one heck of a mosh, wasn't it? And I got one more thing. We have the Scout Crafter Bump. And if you want to see a nice tool restorations, a good friend of the show, been a subscriber for a long time, please check out Armando Loney. And I'll have a link in the description. Go over there, check him out. Short videos, but to the point, really nice, and a great guy. Pay him a visit. Thanks so much. Hope you have a nice day. Take care now. Bye-bye.